The harsh, cold click of metal against metal echoed cruelly, jarringly out of place amidst the luxurious surroundings and solemn atmosphere of the main lobby leading into the grand conference room at the Preston Grand Hotel. Federal Judge Eleanor Vance stood frozen, her breath caught in her chest. Her arms had been violently, brutally wrenched behind her back and were now tightly secured by shiny stainless steel handcuffs. A sharp pain radiated from her wrists up to her shoulders. A physical agony mingled with the shock, indignation, and utter disbelief flooding her mind. She, a federal judge, who had dedicated her entire career to upholding justice and the rule of law, was now being treated like a dangerous criminal in a public place, right on the threshold of an important legal event where she was the keynote speaker. The professional attire she wore, a perfectly tailored black suit of high-quality fabric, a pristine white silk blouse, and elegant Manolo Blahnik heels, now seemed absurdly incongruous with the humiliating image of being handcuffed. Her leather briefcase containing documents for her speech had fallen onto the polished marble floor beside her, a few papers spilling out. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" Judge Vance's voice rang out, striving for composure but unable to hide the simmering fury and the inherent authority of someone accustomed to delivering judgments. "Release me immediately! You have absolutely no authority to do this." Facing her, two young police officers from the Preston Hills Police Department were the source of this outrageous incident. Officer Mark Miller, the one who had just applied the cuffs, had a somewhat handsome appearance but radiated a brash, smug arrogance. He looked at Judge Vance with a defiant gaze, the corner of his lip curling into a condescending smirk. His partner, Officer John Davis, looked younger and somewhat more flustered by the attention of the onlookers, but still tried to appear tough, blocking her path, arms crossed, staring at Judge Vance with undisguised scrutiny and disdain. "No authority?" Miller sneered, his laugh grating in the elegant space. "We're the police. We have the authority. You were resisting officers performing their duties in a public place, refused to provide identification when requested. Your attitude was insolent and defiant. That's more than enough authority to cuff you, ma'am." He deliberately emphasized the word ma'am with a sarcastic tone, the discriminatory implication clear. The incident had unfolded just minutes earlier, stemming from a seemingly ordinary situation. As the black Lincoln sedan, driven by her private chauffeur, pulled up to the main entrance of the Preston Grand Hotel, Judge Vance had politely stepped out, briefcase in hand, ready to enter the lobby for the City Bar Association's annual conference. But as she took just a few steps, Officers Miller and Davis, who were standing nearby on patrol duty, suddenly intercepted her. The initial reason they gave was a random security check because she looked unfamiliar, entering an area hosting an important event. Judge Vance, though finding the request somewhat unusual and unreasonable, she was an official guest, her name on the list, initially tried to maintain a cooperative demeanor. She explained she was an invited guest for the conference and was on her way inside. However, the officer's attitude quickly turned hostile when she politely but firmly asked for a legitimate reason for stopping and suddenly searching her. She also declined to immediately produce her identification without a satisfactory answer and seeing no indication of any wrongdoing on her part. She knew her rights as a citizen and did not accept arbitrary actions by law enforcement. It was precisely Judge Vance's knowledge of the law and her calm, unafraid demeanor that provoked Miller and Davis. They weren't accustomed to being questioned about their authority by a citizen, especially a black woman. Racial prejudice and their arrogant sense of power caused them to lose control. They began making insinuating, insulting remarks laden with discriminatory undertones. Miller asked mockingly, "What kind of job do you have to afford a fancy car and designer clothes like these? Not just some lawyer, I bet?" Davis chuckled along. "Or maybe you were specially invited here to entertain the big shots at the conference." Judge Vance had sternly warned them about their defamatory remarks and harassing behavior. demanding they cease immediately and call their supervisor. She also stated she would record their badge numbers for a formal complaint. Your conduct is unacceptable for law enforcement officers. I demand to speak with your commanding officer. Her firmness and threat to file a complaint were like pouring gasoline on a fire. Miller, feeling challenged and potentially facing trouble, decided he had to strike first to teach her a lesson and possibly silence her. He loudly accused her of resisting, having a dangerous attitude, and ordered Davis to handcuff her, ignoring her protests and explanations of her legal rights. And now, here she stood, handcuffed like a criminal, right at the threshold of the place where she was about to deliver a major speech on the rule of law and justice. The irony and absurdity of the situation filled her with both rage and a profound sadness about the reality of prejudice and abuse of power that still existed within the very system she worked tirelessly to protect. I was not resisting. I was asserting my constitutionally protected rights as a citizen. Judge Vance loudly refuted Miller's accusation, her voice sharp and authoritative. Handcuffing me without any legal basis is unlawful arrest. It's blatant abuse of power. Unlawful? Abuse of power? Miller retorted with a grimace, his expression becoming even more defiant. Let's see who defines the law when we get back to the station. You should remember, around here we are the law. He turned to Davis. Get her to the patrol car. Now, stop her from causing a scene here. He stepped forward, intending to grab Judge Vance's arm and drag her away. A few other conference attendees arriving witnessed the scene, began whispering amongst themselves, and showed clear disapproval. The hotel doorman also approached, looking concerned but hesitant to intervene forcefully. Judge Vance stood her ground, not allowing Miller to pull her easily. She knew that if she were taken to the patrol car and transported to the station, the situation would become even more complicated and harder to control. She needed to resolve this right here, right now. She looked directly at the two young officers, her eyes ice-cold, devoid of fear, holding an authority they couldn't comprehend. She knew who she was, and she knew where true power lay. The question was how to make these fools pay for their actions. I demand you stop immediately, Judge Vance said loudly, her voice resonating, attracting more attention. Your actions are being witnessed by many people. You are digging your own graves. Threatening us? Miller snarled, trying to sound tough, but a hint of anxiety flickered in his voice as he saw more people looking their way, some raising their phones. I'm not scared. You resist, you get arrested. That's the law. What law allows you to insult a citizen based on their skin color? What law allows you to arbitrarily arrest someone without evidence of a violation? Judge Vance shot back, each word sharp as a razor. You should review your basic legal knowledge before it's too late. Judge Vance's intelligent and challenging responses further infuriated Miller. He felt humiliated, overshadowed by a black woman he disdained. He had to do something to regain his authority. Still running your mouth? He tightened his grip on Judge Vance's arm, making her wince in pain. I'll show you what the law is when we get to the station. He turned to Davis. Drag her out. No need to be gentle. Davis hesitated. He looked at the murmuring crowd, at Judge Vance's determined face, then back at Miller's angry eyes. He sensed something was wrong, but the fear of disobeying Miller and the pressure to appear tough made him recklessly comply. Together with Miller, he forcefully pulled Judge Vance towards the patrol car parked a few yards away. Just as the situation seemed direst, when Judge Vance felt she could resist no longer, a deep, resonant voice laced with authority cut through the chaos from behind them. Excuse me, what seems to be the problem here? Everyone, including Miller and Davis, turned their heads. A middle-aged man, dressed in an elegant black suit, stepped out of a black Lincoln sedan that had just pulled up right behind the patrol car. His salt-and-pepper hair was neatly combed, his face amiable, but his eyes were sharp and observant. It was the mayor of Preston Hills, David Thompson. He was also on his way to attend the opening session of the legal conference at the hotel. As soon as he stepped out of the car, Mayor Thompson noticed the unusual scene. Two police officers trying to drag a handcuffed black woman while a crowd gathered with curious and disapproving expressions. He frowned, sensing something was very wrong, and quickly approached. And then, as he got a clear view of the woman being restrained, he froze. Surprise, confusion, and a hint of disbelief washed over his face. He recognized her, unmistakably. "Judge Vance?" Mayor Thompson exclaimed, his voice filled with astonishment. He couldn't believe his eyes. Federal Judge Eleanor Vance, an incredibly important and respected figure in the judiciary, being treated like this by two of his city's police officers? Good God, what on earth is happening here? Hearing the mayor himself call out the name and title Judge Vance was like a thunderclap to officers Miller and Davis. They froze, instinctively loosening their grip on the judge. They turned to look at the mayor, then back at the woman they had just handcuffed, their faces visibly starting to drain of color. Mr. Mayor?" Miller stammered, his voice suddenly weak and trembling. He couldn't believe the mayor had appeared at this exact moment, and even worse, knew this woman. Mayor Thompson ignored Miller's stammered greeting. His eyes, filled with anger and concern, fixed on the red marks on Judge Vance's wrists, where the cuffs had just been. He stepped forward quickly, his voice now stern and authoritative. "Judge Vance, are you all right?" "Why? Why are you in handcuffs?" "Officers," he whirled around to face Miller and Davis, his eyes blazing. "What in the hell are you doing?" Hearing the mayor confirm the woman's identity and title, Miller and Davis felt the ground collapsing beneath them. Judge Vance, Eleanor Vance, presiding federal judge, the name they'd heard in news reports, in briefings, the powerful judge who presided over major federal cases. The black woman they had just disparaged as special, falsely accused of resisting, and brutally handcuffed. Was that esteemed federal judge? Impossible. This had to be a nightmare. "Sir, Mr. Mayor?" Miller tried to stammer out a hopeless explanation, his voice trembling uncontrollably. We were just performing our duties according to procedure. She was acting suspiciously and refused to cooperate." "Suspiciously? Refused to cooperate?" Mayor Thompson cut him off, his voice dripping with skepticism and anger. He looked at Judge Vance's elegant professional attire, her composed demeanor. "Suspicious how? Refused to cooperate in what way that required you to handcuff a federal judge like this? Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" By now, Judge Vance, though still shocked and angry, had regained her characteristic composure and dignity. She looked directly at the two officers who were beginning to tremble. "Mayor Thompson, thank you for your timely arrival," she said, her voice cool but clear, carrying an undeniable weight. "These two officers stopped me as I arrived at the hotel without providing any legitimate reason. They then used deeply insulting language, heavily laden with racial prejudice, when speaking to me. When I demanded they cease their harassment and call their supervisor, they escalated the situation, falsely accused me of resisting, and proceeded to handcuff me unlawfully." She paused, letting her words sink into the tense atmosphere, then continued, her gaze sharp as a knife fixed on Miller and Davis, making them unable to meet her eyes. "Perhaps these two young officers need a refresher course on the basics of our legal system and the people who uphold it. Allow me to reintroduce myself. I am Eleanor Vance, presiding judge of the United States District Court for the Eastern District." That final introduction, uttered by the victim herself with the unmistakable tone of authority and truth, completely shattered Miller and Davis's composure. Federal judge, presiding! There was no doubt left. They had truly committed a monumental blunder, an idiotic mistake beyond any hope of redemption. Miller and Davis's faces turned deathly pale. Their limbs began to shake violently. They looked at each other with absolute horror, realizing their careers, futures, and possibly even their freedom were hanging by a thread. Federal presiding judge?" Miller stammered, his voice barely audible, cold sweat drenching his forehead and the back of his neck. Davis could no longer stand. His legs gave way, and he slowly sank to both knees on the hard sidewalk, head bowed low, his entire body trembling uncontrollably. Mayor Thompson witnessed the scene, his anger and embarrassment intensifying. He turned on the two officers, his voice thundering, echoing down the street. "Officers! Did you hear Judge Vance clearly? You just handcuffed a presiding federal judge. Do you have any comprehension of the consequences of this idiotic action?" He didn't wait for an answer. He knew he had to act immediately to control the situation and demonstrate a firm response. "Remove those handcuffs from Judge Vance! Immediately! Right now!" he roared. Miller, still standing, frantically fumbled for the handcuff key in his pocket. His hand shook so badly he dropped the key onto the ground. He hastily bent down to retrieve it, then fumbled awkwardly until he finally managed to insert the key into the lock on the cuffs biting into Judge Vance's wrists. Click! The last cuff sprang open. Deep, angry red welts were clearly visible on the judge's wrists, painful marks of abuse of power and prejudice. The moment her hands were free, Miller lost the last shred of self-control. He scrambled to kneel beside Davis on the dirty sidewalk, right in front of Judge Vance and Mayor Thompson. "Your Honor, please forgive our ignorance," Miller begged, tears starting to stream down his face, his voice choked with fear. We truly didn't know it was you. We were blind. We were so stupid. Please have mercy." Davis, still kneeling, also stammered similar pleas, his voice broken by sobs and tremors. Please, forgive us, Judge. Mr. Mayor, please put in a good word for us. We were wrong. We truly know we were wrong. Please don't ruin our lives." The sight of two large police officers, who moments ago were arrogant and abusive, now kneeling, weeping, and begging pitifully before a black female federal judge at the entrance of a luxury hotel, witnessed by the mayor and an increasingly curious crowd, was a scene of intense drama, irony, and profound humiliation. True power had spoken, and the scales of justice had dramatically tipped. Judge Vance looked down at the two men groveling at her feet. Her eyes held no pity or satisfaction, only the cold severity of a representative of justice and deep disappointment at the degradation of those sworn to protect it. She knew their pleas stemmed from selfish fear, not genuine remorse. She turned to Mayor Thompson, who was also regarding the officers with contempt and fury. "Mr. Mayor!" Judge Vance's voice had completely regained the calm authority befitting a judge. "I believe this incident cannot be resolved with belated apologies. It requires serious handling, following the due process of law and police department discipline. I request that the city's chief of police, Patrick O'Malley, be present here immediately to take charge of this matter." Mayor Thompson nodded emphatically, fully agreeing with the judge's request. "Yes, Judge Vance. Absolutely correct. I will personally call Chief O'Malley right now. Rest assured, I guarantee you these officers will be held fully accountable for their unacceptable and shameful conduct." He immediately pulled out his personal cell phone and quickly dialed the emergency number for the head of the Preston Hills Police Department. The confrontation on the sidewalk was merely the opening act of a legal and disciplinary storm about to break over the heads of the two prejudiced and power-abusing young officers. Mayor David Thompson's call to Police Chief Patrick O'Malley was conducted with unprecedented urgency and gravity. Just hearing the mayor's brief description of the situation, two subordinate officers handcuffing federal judge Eleanor Vance right outside the Preston Grand Hotel, Chief O'Malley, a tough, seasoned Irishman known for his strictness, knew his department was facing a massive scandal with the potential to severely damage its reputation and public trust. He immediately canceled all other meetings and appointments, simultaneously instructing Lieutenant Daniel Carter, head of the Internal Affairs Division, IAD, along with the division's two best investigators, to prepare a vehicle and meet him at the scene immediately. He knew handling this required the presence of top leadership and the swift professional intervention of IAD. During the wait for Chief O'Malley, Mayor Thompson requested officers Miller and Davis rise from the sidewalk but remain stationary under the close watch of two hotel security guards and another police officer dispatched from a nearby patrol unit. He also showed utmost concern and respect for Judge Vance, personally inviting her into a private, luxurious waiting room inside the hotel where she could sit, rest, regain her composure, and escape the prying eyes and cell phone cameras of the curious crowd outside. He had his assistant bring her water and a cool towel. Less than 20 minutes later, 3 police vehicles, including the chief's command car, arrived swiftly at the Preston Grand Hotel. Chief O'Malley, his face grim with anger and concern, quickly exited his vehicle, followed by Lieutenant Carter and the 2 IAD investigators. He went straight to the waiting room where Judge Vance and Mayor Thompson were waiting. "Judge Vance," Chief O'Malley approached, bowing his head respectfully and apologetically. His voice was deep and firm. "I am Patrick O'Malley, Chief of the Preston Hills Police Department. I truly lack the words to express my regret and shame for the intolerable conduct my subordinates inflicted upon you today. On behalf of the entire city police force, I offer you my sincerest and deepest apologies." "Chief O'Malley," Judge Vance responded calmly but with equal gravity. She had fully regained her judicial bearing. "I acknowledge your apology. However, what I expect more are concrete actions to handle this matter fairly, rigorously, and thoroughly, to ensure that similar incidents never happen again." "I completely understand and commit that to you, Judge," O'Malley affirmed resolutely, determination flashing in his eyes. "There will be absolutely no cover-up, tolerance, or leniency. I have ordered the Internal Affairs Division to conduct an immediate, comprehensive investigation. Officers Mark Miller and John Davis have been suspended effective immediately and will face the strictest disciplinary process under state law, federal law, and departmental regulations." He turned to introduce Lieutenant Carter, the head of IAD, to Judge Vance. "This is Lieutenant Daniel Carter, who will personally oversee this investigation. He is a highly experienced and impartial investigator." Lieutenant Carter also stepped forward, greeting Judge Vance respectfully. "Your Honor, we are deeply sorry for what occurred. We would like permission to begin taking your official statement now if you feel up to it, or we can arrange another time at your convenience." Judge Vance nodded. "I am prepared to provide my statement now, Lieutenant. I want this matter clarified as soon as possible so I can still attend the conference opening." She glanced at her watch. Time was running short, and so, right there in the hotel's private waiting room, witnessed by Mayor Thompson and Chief O'Malley, Lieutenant Carter and a female investigator proceeded to take the official statement of Federal Judge Eleanor Vance. The interview was conducted with solemnity, professionalism, and deep respect. Judge Vance, with her remarkable memory and articulate delivery, recounted the entire incident in detail, omitting no word or action by officers Miller and Davis from the moment she was stopped until the mayor's arrival. Her statement was recorded and meticulously transcribed, forming a solid foundation for the investigation. Meanwhile, outside, Mark Miller and John Davis were escorted by 2 other senior officers back to the Internal Affairs Division headquarters. They were separated and placed in individual interrogation rooms. Facing professional IAD investigators, who held no personal allegiances and were fully aware of the incident's gravity and the intense scrutiny from the highest levels, both Miller and Davis quickly lost all spirit of resistance. Knowing their actions were exposed, witnessed by the mayor, with the victim being a federal judge, and likely recorded by body cams and security cameras, they dared not equivocate, deny, or fabricate further. Under sharp questioning and immense psychological pressure, both finally bowed their heads and admitted to their complete misconduct. Admitting they approached Judge Vance without cause based on prejudice related to her race and appearance. Admitting they used insulting, derogatory, and disrespectful language. Admitting they demanded identification unreasonably. And admitting they escalated the situation, falsely accused her of resisting, and unlawfully handcuffed her when refused and feeling challenged. Their detailed confessions were fully recorded, becoming crucial, corroborating evidence for the case file. The IAD investigation proceeded with astonishing speed while ensuring rigorous adherence to all procedures. They collected additional statements from Mayor Thompson, hotel staff who witnessed the event, and several lawyers and judges also present who saw the unusual scene. They meticulously analyzed body cam footage from Miller and Davis, confirming the testimonies of Judge Vance and other witnesses. The officers' personnel files were reviewed again, revealing Miller's history of inappropriate conduct while confirming Davis as a weak-willed accomplice. In less than 48 hours, IAD's preliminary investigative report was completed and submitted to Chief O'Malley. The conclusion was undeniable. Officers Mark Miller and John Davis had systematically and severely violated numerous codes of professional ethics, operational procedures, anti-discrimination policies, and laws related to abuse of authority and unlawful arrest. Their actions not only caused serious harm to the victim, but also negatively impacted the image, credibility, and public trust in the entire Preston Hills Police Department. The recommended disciplinary action could be nothing less than the maximum penalty: permanent termination from the police force. Chief O'Malley, with the consensus of his command staff and the support of Mayor Thompson, swiftly approved the termination decision. The decision was publicly announced, accompanied by a formal letter of apology sent to Judge Vance and a strong press release condemning the misconduct while reaffirming the department's commitment to building a professional, fair force that serves the community with respect. However, the story didn't end with the loss of their careers. Given the serious criminal nature of their actions, particularly the violation of a citizen's civil rights under color of law, a federal offense, and the unlawful arrest, Chief O'Malley directed that the case file be immediately transferred to the United States Attorney's Office for consideration of criminal charges. Mark Miller and John Davis would now face a new legal battle, where justice would be determined by the very system they were once a part of. The decision to pursue criminal charges against former police officers Mark Miller and John Davis was made swiftly and decisively by the United States Attorney's Office for the Eastern District. The case was deemed exceptionally serious, not only due to the blatant abuse of power and discrimination, but also because the victim was a sitting federal judge, a direct assault on the foundations of the judicial system. Assistant United States Attorney, AUSA, Michael Ramirez, a young but highly regarded prosecutor known for handling complex civil rights cases, was assigned to lead the prosecution team. Formal charges were filed against Miller and Davis in the U.S. District Court, encompassing multiple serious offenses reflecting the full scope of their violations. 1. Deprivation of rights under color of law, 18 U.S.C. Section 242. This was the core federal charge, focusing on the willful deprivation of Judge Vance's rights to equal treatment, freedom from discrimination based on race, and freedom from unreasonable seizure, unlawful arrest, committed by the defendants while acting in their official capacity. 2. Unlawful arrest. This charge specifically addressed the act of restraining and handcuffing Judge Vance without any legal justification. Third assault in the third degree. Although no serious physical injury occurred, the act of forceful handcuffing causing pain and leaving marks was deemed sufficient grounds for an assault charge under applicable law. The trial of Miller and Davis commenced several months later and became a national focal point. Media outlets sent numerous reporters, civil rights organizations monitored closely, and the public paid keen attention to the outcome of this landmark case. Security at the federal courthouse was heightened to maximum levels. The defendants, Mark Miller and John Davis, appeared in court looking anxious and worn, a stark contrast to their previous smug, arrogant demeanor. They wore inexpensive suits instead of the police uniforms they had been stripped of, sitting silently beside their court-appointed or privately hired defense attorneys. Federal Judge Eleanor Vance, as the victim and most crucial witness, agreed to testify publicly, demonstrating courage and commitment to justice. She entered the courtroom dressed in elegant professional attire, her demeanor retaining its characteristic dignity, solemnity, and extraordinary calm. Her presence commanded silence in the courtroom. On the witness stand, guided by AUSA Ramirez, Judge Vance recounted the entire incident once more. Her voice was clear, articulate, without a trace of tremor or weakness. She detailed every aspect of the confrontation, from the derogatory remarks and prejudiced questions to the unreasonable and forceful handcuffing. She not only focused on what happened to her personally, but skillfully integrated analyses of the defendant's violations of law, procedure, and professional ethics from the perspective of a legal expert. Her testimony was both deeply personal and carried the weight of a lesson on the rule of law, making an extremely powerful impact on the jury and everyone present. During cross-examination, the defense attorneys for Miller and Davis attempted to discredit or pick apart Judge Vance's testimony. They tried to focus on her initial refusal to cooperate, or overreaction, or suggested she was overly sensitive to the officer's words. However, with her intelligence, sharp mind, and extensive legal experience, Judge Vance calmly and convincingly answered every question logically and coherently, neutralizing the defense's efforts. Prosecutor Ramirez presented a near-flawless case. Beyond Judge Vance's powerful testimony, he introduced testimony from Mayor Thompson, other witnesses from the scene, the detailed findings of the IAD investigation, and crucially, video footage from body cams and hotel security cameras. This footage, played publicly in court, irrefutably exposed the ugly reality of the abuse of power, discriminatory attitudes, and aggressive behavior of Miller and Davis. Ramirez also used the defendant's admissions from the internal investigation as corroborating evidence. In his closing argument, Ramirez stressed that this case was not just about individual misconduct, but served as a wake-up call about a systemic issue, demanding severe punishment to protect fundamental civil rights and maintain faith in justice. The defense, left with few effective arguments, focused primarily on pleading for leniency. They reiterated that Miller and Davis were young, had lost their careers, expressed remorse, and had families waiting. They tried to persuade the jury and the judge that a lengthy prison sentence would be overly harsh and unnecessary. After hearing all arguments, deliberations, and legal instructions from the presiding judge, a different federal judge assigned for objectivity, the jury of 12 citizens retired to deliberate. The deliberation took slightly longer than expected, indicating careful consideration of the facts and charges. Finally, they returned to the courtroom with a unanimous verdict. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the jury foreperson stood to read the verdict. Charge by charge was read, and after each the resounding words, "Guilty." Mark Miller and John Davis were found guilty on all the most serious counts, including the federal charge of deprivation of rights under color of law. Miller and Davis stood pale-faced, their legs seeming ready to buckle. Sobs erupted again from their families. Judge Vance, seated in the front row, quietly closed her eyes for a moment, a wave of heavy relief washing over her. Justice was being served. Several weeks later, the final sentencing hearing took place. The presiding judge, after hearing arguments from both sides regarding sentencing factors, delivered final remarks before imposing the sentence. He emphasized the extraordinary seriousness of this case, where individuals tasked with upholding the law had brazenly violated it, and the victim was a high-ranking member of the judiciary. The defendant's actions the judge stated sternly, not only harmed Judge Vance personally, but also damaged society's faith in the fairness and equality of our legal system. Racial discrimination is a cancer that eats at the moral fabric of this nation, and it becomes exponentially more dangerous when wielded by those cloaked in public authority. This court must send a clear and powerful message that such conduct will not be tolerated and will be punished appropriately. After careful consideration of all factors, including the severity of the offenses, aggravating and mitigating circumstances, and the provisions of federal and state law, this court sentences. He paused for a beat, then read the sentences aloud. Defendant Mark Miller, 5 years and 2 months imprisonment. Defendant John Davis, 4 years and 2 months imprisonment. A stern sentence for the crimes of violating civil rights and abusing police power, delivered unequivocally. Mark Miller and John Davis stood frozen, all hope for leniency utterly extinguished. They would pay for their foolish, prejudiced actions with long years behind the bars of a federal prison. United States Marshals immediately stepped forward, handcuffed the 2 former officers, and escorted them out of the silent, heavy courtroom to begin serving their sentences. The termination from the force and the significant prison sentences brought a just and fitting conclusion to the story. Justice had spoken forcefully. The case became an important precedent, a stark warning to law enforcement nationwide about the consequences of abusing power and engaging in discrimination. Judge Eleanor Vance, after the storm passed, continued her distinguished work presiding over the federal court. She did not allow the traumatic experience to break her or make her bitter. On the contrary, it further fueled her strength and resolve in the tireless fight for a justice system that is fair, equitable, and truly serves the interests of all people, regardless of race or social status. Her dignity had been harshly tested, but ultimately it was not only preserved, but shone more brilliantly than ever. Thank you for listening to this entire story. If you enjoyed this content, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next meaningful story. We'll have another meaningful story for you tomorrow.